Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Tell Me Why. I am thrilled today to present to you a book that I consider to be probably the most important book that's been written in the last few years. And there are tons of excellent Beatles books out there. But this book combines history that you know nothing about with eloquent writing, with the tools to let you experience their subject matter for yourself. Wonderful photographs you've never glimpsed before, and you hardly ever say that in the Beatles world. I've been doing this on May 1st. I've been doing this for 39 years. And this book had so many things that I did not know about. It's one that we're going to talk about today. So it is called Ribbons of Rust, and I'll let them talk to you about that. Let's see if I get it so there's no glare. About that title. It is, see if I can show you some of the pictures. Look at that. You've seen that one. You probably haven't seen this very young George Martin. There are so many people that are discussed, and you can see that there are QR codes for every single thing they talk about so that you can listen as you go. It is a brilliant experience, and it's written by two of my favorite people. The first I've been friends with for, gosh, probably most of those 39 years, a long time. In fact, he probably doesn't remember this, but one day, a couple of decades ago, I got a box in the mail, and it included his 60s Chronicle, which I have used, in fact, used in my very last book as a resource, because if you're going to talk about the Beatles, you have to talk about what's going on around them. That is really important, especially when you get to 64, 65, 65, when the folk rock comes in and changes their whole game plan. One that I cherish, which I think was an early work of his, and because I'm Irish, very blatantly Irish, and I love this, and this is on the coffee table in my family room, the Irish American Chronicle. And then he invented and wrote the two books, and this is part two, in the Fab Four FAQ series. Excellent. If you don't have it, you need to grab it. And I'm saving the best for last, even though I'm now not going in chronological order. Solo in the 70s, which I haven't gotten into yet because I'm not quite there, but I'm getting very close, and it's going to be super important. And the book that changed my entire opinion on Revolver. It is Revolver, How the Beatles Reimagined Rock and Roll. Did not like Revolver. I'm a girl from the conservative South, and I thought the Beatles had lost their ever-loving minds. I said, what on this album can I even like? What is there to like on this album? And this book, unfortunately, I did not read it until I was an adult, but this book made Revolver come alive for me. All of these are written by one of the smartest people I know, my dear friend, Robert Rodriguez. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jude. It's such an honor to be here, and this is so cool. Thank you so much for all the kind words. You've done an amazing researcher and writer yourself. I'm so glad that you're continuing with this Lennon series, because I remember there was a time where you're thinking, "Well, I want to keep doing this," as we all face as writers, and you push through it. So, all to the greater good for all of us. Thank you so
I
much.
quit about once every 2 months. Nicole Michaels saves me from jumping off the ledge, but it is so much research, and you type a sentence and footnoted, and type a sentence and footnoted, and it's so slow and so laborious. And I think
But the
about
reward is finding out something you didn't know about something you love,
and
right?
in Ribbons of Rust, you will do that. I mean, there is no doubt about it. So your partner in crime and historical research and friendship is the author of a series that I could not get along without. There's absolutely no way. I am not a music expert. He and I were chatting before the show, and I said, I play piano for years. I played French horn and sort of played trumpet. And so I know music, but I am not a music expert, not a Beatles music expert, and I could not do what I do without the Beatles Recording Reference Manual. This is volume 1, which is from my Bonnie, and that's important. We'll talk about that in a second, through Beatles for Sale. Volume 2, and if you guys don't have these books, you really need to get them. This is Help through Revolver. And I love the cover pictures too, because they really show the evolution. This is volume 3, Sergeant Pepper's through Magical Mystery Tour. And volume 4, which is the Beatles, the White Album, through Yellow Submarine. And finally, Let It Be through Abbey Road, or as Bruce Spicer would say, the Beatles finally let it be. Excellent books. He is a musician, a composer, and even a mix editor or mix engineer. And I'll let him explain that to you. Thank goodness I know that now, because like, how does he understand all this? And I don't understand it. Welcome to the show, the brilliant Jerry Hammack.
Thanks, Jude. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about the Beatles. I love doing that, and thank you for all your kind words about my work. So we were saying earlier, I'm really I'm glad it's been of service to you and helped you with your research.
So much, and I have taken on for years. I think this is going to be the 11th year of writing the Fest blog, and as I was saying, we spent 4 years going track by track through Rubber Soul and then Revolver. And oh man, if I hadn't had your books, I would really have been in trouble. I think I used about 20 sources for each blog, and I listed them so that everyone could see. But writing about the music has been very difficult for me, and it's seamless for the two of you. It is what you do, and you do it so well. So let's jump into Ribbons of Rust. The first thing that I want to do is get you very quickly, before we start talking about the book, to explain these 2 pages for everyone, and I'll hold it where they can see. Tell us about that page.
Sure. So in the top of the book, what we do is we introduce you to the interactive elements of the book, and those are all gained through through QR codes. What the QR codes allow you to do is to access archival content, a lot of YouTube content, music, and British Pathé documentaries that we talk about within the text. The idea here is that as you are reading about what the Beatles were influenced by and what was going on in their world, that you can also experience it for yourself. So when we're talking about Lonnie Donegan, you can hear the Lonnie Donegan songs that they were listening to. You can hear and take yourself into that world with them, and I think it gives you. Well, there's that old saying that writing about music is like dancing about architecture, and what we wanted to do is like take down that wall a little bit. So we're still writing about music, but we wanted you to be able to experience it too. If we've done our job right, you're transported into that world, and especially if you haven't heard these things before, you've only read about the influences that the Beatles had. You're able to experience them for yourself too, and it gets lost in the fullness of time that this was all new. This was all new. This was cutting edge. The Beatles were listening to artists of their time that were the same as kids growing up today listening to artists of their time, and we wanted to bring that experience back, and this was a way that we could facilitate that.
And if people are scared of using a QR code, because I've watched people, since I have an audiobook, they don't want to try to use an audiobook. They're like, oh, I can't do that. This teaches them how to do that. If you read that page and hold your phone, you will know how to use a QR code. It's not scary. It's very easy.
No, it's easy.
Through that.
It won't work with a landline. We should put that in there.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Don't hold this up to the book. Won't work.
No, it won't work. Okay. How about this page right here?
So that page explains it's kind of a key to the diagrams that you'll find within the book. And so the diagrams are breakouts of the recording and mixing process that happened with the songs that the Beatles recorded. And so from left to right, it gives you it tells you where the recording was made, tells you who was active in the recording, gives you where available, gives you details like what tape number that was in the EMI library when we get to that point, but then shows you on a track by track basis what was contained, what performances were there. And for people that are listening to the Beatles tracks on headphones, for instance, they'll be able to hear these breakouts and understand, oh, this was recorded as the backing track altogether, and there it is in my left ear, and here's was an overdub, and that's in my right ear, and it just helps again for you to get another view of how the music was put together, because modern music is constructed in the studio. While there is a lot of live elements, and the Beatles recorded a number of directly live tunes, much of it is built in the studio and built through the technical process of recording, editing, and mixing. And that's what we try to explode for people to understand. And it's not done in a way that's unapproachable. It's done in a way that's very accessible.
Yes, you will understand this. I mean, this is not something, if you're thinking, oh, this book is over my head, trust me, it's not. The first thing they do before they begin the book is teach you how to use the elements of the book. So it's accessible for sure. So on page 22, really early in the book, you say that the day John met Paul was the big bang of the 60s culture. And I mean, that just stopped me dead in my tracks. It's a great phrase, so true. And I thought, you know what? That's what this book is. This book is the big bang of 60s culture. These are things that it goes way, way back. I think of that line from Longfellow, this is the forest primeval. This is the forest primeval. This is before they polished, before they honed, before they became. This is the beginning, even before Jerry's volume 1, even before My Bonnie, before the Beatles Recording Reference Manual, volume 1. This is very, very early. So tell me why you decided to focus on this formative era in the Beatles' career.
I think that ultimately what we wanted to do to really understand the journey the Beatles were on is to present their origin story. And that's what this is, because, they grew up, they went through their school years to this point where they liked music, but not until Lonnie Donegan came along and showed them anybody can do this. It was like what a later generation would have as a punk ethos. You don't need talent necessarily. You just need enthusiasm, several of your friends, household object. It's helpful if you got a guitar or a banjo or something like that. And then right on the heels of that, Elvis Presley comes along and just totally rocks their world. I mean, two-way man. I've spoken to so many people on my own show. Heartbreak Hotel was like a watershed moment. It just transformed their lives. So to take it back to July of 1954, you've got a confluence of three big things happening all on top of each other. You've got the end of wartime rationing in England, which means suddenly these wartime kids, the war started for Britain in 1939, 1954, they're now 15, 14 years old, depending on when they were born, 39, 40, whatever. What happens to people, human beings at that age of development? They start to assert their own identities, separate from the culture and identity that's been imposed upon them by their parents, right? So what happens no sooner do they hit that age, skiffle comes along, rationing is over, you can suddenly buy things again, you've got money in your pocket, and then rock and roll on top of that. It's this perfect storm to create what we described that being the big bang of 60s culture. Everybody that was hit by that tsunami in the summer of 54 and the waves that rippled ever after, it all manifests itself in whatever form of art you are drawn to by the 60s. That's when it comes full flower. So that's what we sussed out is, okay, this is really the starting point. This is ground zero. Let's take it forward from there. And so that's what we did.
And you do. You go to ground zero. You go back to the very beginning. I think for John Lennon, the fact that he has a mother who embraces rock and roll and has this vast collection of American platters, coupled with the fact that he has a mom, Aunt Mimi, with whom he's living, who does not approve of it. And the best inspiration for any teenager is to defy authority. You
Push
roll
back.
those two together and you've got someone who's just dyed in the wool dedicated to it. Don't do it. Do it. It's, as you say, the perfect storm. Well, when I started Tell Me Why, I wanted to do a short podcast that would clue people into what's going on without them having to invest a lot of time. In this case, that works against us because your book is something, and of course, you've discussed it with lots of people on long and informative podcasts. And Robert, I certainly should have mentioned something about the Beatles, which is an award-winning podcast. And it is just a whole nother level from Tell Me Why. But I wanted people to get a bird's eye view. I'm going to give them a bird's eye view of your book, but I'm telling everyone who is listening, there's so much in here. It doesn't look like a large book, but there's so much in here that you've never heard before. And you're going to see from these few examples. So tell us a little bit about, and I didn't know this existed, the Easter 1960 Forthland Road recording.
Robert,
Sure.
would you like to start, or would you like me to start?
You start. Yeah, this is your baby.
So the Forthland road recordings at Paul's home. This is the first demos, if you want to call them, where they've got Stewart playing bass and kind of breaking him in. And it's the first, if you want to think of Beatles recordings, it's the first Beatles recording with the Beatles as the name of the band at that point. Right. They recorded them on the upstairs landing at the home. There was a water closet in a bathroom area there. They put the tape deck into the bathroom part of this dual bath area, and then they were in the vestibule in the middle of it where you could get 5 people. It was Mike and John, Paul, and George and Stewart that were there, and they played through some blues tracks. They practiced some songs that would end up in their set list. Robert can probably detail the tracks a little bit better than I, but the idea there is that they are already at this early stage. They want to hear what they sound like on tape. They're making they're making music like they hear it. And so that they wanted that experience for themselves, and the way you do that as a young musician to evaluate it is you record yourself. That they thought to do that at such an early formative stage, that tells you where their heads were at. It was always about documenting it, ultimately making a record, and that was their first tentative step, was making those demos at Paul's place.
What are some of the songs that they do, Robert?
Well, there are covers of hits of the day that they do throughout there. One that comes to mind is Hallelujah, I Love Her So, which had been covered by Eddie Cochran, who that very Easter weekend in 1960 was killed in Britain at the end of his tour when he was driving to the airport and his car got in a crash. So I don't know if they knew the news of that as they were laying that song down on tape or not. But what is very striking, and what sort of emerged in this book as a thesis, as it were, is that we know the Beatles were this fabulous live powerhouse act that got developed in the crucible of Hamburg, where they were playing under great pressures to put on a show in a hostile foreign environment for long stretches that a bar band nowadays has no idea what it's like, 6 hours a night, 7 nights a week, and fueled by amphetamines and beer, but having to constantly keep entertaining that tough crowd, right? So we know the Beatles mastered that, because by the time they hit, they were old pros at time. That by the time they hit the Sullivan Show before 73 million people in 64, they had it down cold, right? And in Britain before that. But what sort of emerged in our research is that it was never about being performers to them. That was a nice ancillary skill they developed. It was always about making records. And that is why at every single juncture they have where they're able to lay down sound for self-assessment, whether it's at Percy Phillips Studio in Liverpool, and then 2 years later at Fourth and Road, and then in Hamburg, backing Tony Sheridan, and then the Decca Audition, they always put down original material alongside whatever else they're doing. Always. That is the signal to their true intent. John and Paul are the serious two teenage world-class songwriters that come together, and it's like bigger than the sum of its parts. And that is what you see at the Forthland tape when they do I'll Follow the Sun, One After 909, Hello Little Girl, songs we would come to know later during the Beatle years. There is the embryonic versions of them, as well as other things like that instrumental Cayenne and Cat's Walk, which later on was recorded by Chris Barber's band at Cat Call. So it's a serious signaling of their intent that we're original songwriters. This is what we do. And that's why if you want the greatest evidence of that, look at a Bob Dylan. He'll go in a studio, bash out his records, record his songs, go out, take them live before an audience, and reinvent them, always, for decades. The Beatles stuck to their arrangements of their records. They were just presenting the record live. Therein lies the difference between those two artistic approaches. And that's one of the things that we sort of, sussed out when we were writing this book. It's like, well, look at that. They were always recording original material.
Yeah. And when John would see people perform, let's say a Little Richard, and Little Richard would vamp on this song and change it, it made John furious because he said, I'm a record fan. I don't want someone to change the song. And he did not like that at all. One of the things that you point out is that for years, the Easter recording we were told it was done in the bathroom, but it couldn't because it's too small. You sussed that out. You said it had to be on the landing. I mean, so I had never heard the Easter 1960 recording, and I used my QR code and I listened to it, and I stopped it and I ran to get Ran. And of course I'm teared up. Oh. I'm a little bit teared up right now. And I was like, Stu, you can hear Stu. And we're sitting there listening to Stu.
And you're thinking, good Lord, he can hit the notes.
Ran was saying,
he's not recording with his back to the mic.
He's on. Now he's off. Now he's on. Now he's off. But it is what a wonderful thing you've given us. And that in itself. So now I said that I had 4 questions and a bonus. This is the bonus because I wanted to share something with you at the end. But tell us about the role of Harold Phillips.
Harold Phillips, Lord Woodbine, as we know throughout our Beatle history, the famous picture taken at Arnhem Cemetery, at the War Memorial there, their name shall liveth forevermore. He's the man of color there. So Harold Phillips, Lord Woodbine, was a business partner of Alan Williams, who of course was their first manager, the guy that between the two of them, and I know Williams is given a lot of credit for bringing them to Hamburg, Harold was co-manager of the Caribbean Steel Band. They were the ones who basically discovered the Hamburg scene and took off there, left the Jacaranda high and dry. Suddenly they vanished in the night, and that's where they got tracked down to, discovering that Bruno Koschmider, this club manager who had a few clubs, could not afford American rock and roll, but was looking to book entertainment from Britain as the next best thing. And so the Caribbean band went there, and now he's looking for more rock and roll. And so it was between Harold and Alan Williams that pipeline got established. Now, largely sort of, if not written out of the story completely, sort of presented as comic relief because he was a character. He was a big personality. That's how he's presented in The Man Who Gave the Beatles Away. Woodbine was also a songwriter and a musician himself. He was from Toxteth, which was a rough sort of immigrant and Black neighborhood in Liverpool. And we know that from the friend of John's who played him, Little Richard, for the first time, Michael Hill, who picked up Long Tall Sally while on holiday in Holland before it had been issued in Britain. And so by this time, John already knew Elvis, knew Lonnie Donegan. This was the first time he heard rock and roll that raucous, Long Tall Sally. And then we discovered it was a Black man. It was revelatory. You read his quotes in Anthology. He had no idea that Black men could make that kind of sound, right? So, and that turned him on to blues and everything else. R&B, of course, became a huge R&B fan. But Harold Williams was the first or Harold Phillips rather, was the first musician of color he met that sort of mentored him, that took the Beatles under his wing when they would come to his very rough neighborhood to hang out and learn stuff, musical stuff, that, as was pointed out later, he never would have learned on Menlo Road.
Yeah.
You know, this hardcore stuff. So direct pipeline to a big part of their musical education that of late, the scholarship is starting to actually shine more light on his story. There's a wonderful book out called Blackbird that came out last year, and it basically covers the depths of Black influence on Beatles music. There's another one coming out this month by Richard Mills called The Beatles and Black Music that everybody should check out. And it's just another one of these areas that has been under-examined in the scholarship that's finally getting its due.
There's another book called Liverpool, the Fifth Beatle, and there is a great chapter in that book about the music of African-American artists and how their opinion toward that was completely different from what's going on in the States. It wasn't, oh, something dangerous to be avoided by your teenager, but it was part of their very rich culture. They have 83 nationalities in Liverpool, and they embrace all of them. What I wanted to show you was, I was very fortunate to be able to attend the premiere of Backbeat when it came out in Liverpool. And there's our tickets. But if you'll see, if I can get this where there's no glare on it, let's see. Do you see that card at the top? It says, "I was the boss, Lord Woodbine."
That's great.
Did you meet him?
Well, he was at the after party that we went to. It was at Alan Williams, and the guy that owned John Lennon Bar in Matthew Street invited us to the after party, and he was there, and he and Alan were what's a good word? Rambunctious. And so he was dissing John, and as ever, I can't take that. And I stepped up and said, "Look, you better quit talking bad about John Lennon. I love John Lennon like a brother." And he went, "Oh, you have a mighty strange brother."
Have you talked to Carol Phillips?
No, and I almost did during Dave Bedford's work on the film that they did.
Yes.
Lennon Legacy.
Searching for Lennon or something like that?
Yeah, looking for Lennon or
Looking
whatever.
for Lennon, yeah.
And in fact, they asked me to send pictures of the card and the invitation and everything to use in the film. But no, that was a great night. That I'll tell you the story about that sometime at the fest, because it ended up being the best night of my life.
Wow.
But all right. So
Carol gave us the picture of her father for the book.
Oh, she did.
Yes.
That is fantastic. Oh my goodness. Now I did not know, and you say this in the book, that he owned the new club Artiste where Janice, the stripper. I thought Alan owned it. In fact, in his book, Alan says he owned it. And I was like, there he goes again, because you know
he
Alan
says a lot of things. Yeah.
Yes, he does. Yes, he does. And he says them exuberantly. All right, let's talk about the 1958-1960 Dead Zone and how this really provided the gateway for the Beatles.
Well,
you noticed that.
Okay,
go ahead, Jerry. Okay. I'm just going to say that they were swimming very much against the tide in terms of they were sort of these true believers and these people that would just sort of preach the gospel of the original rock and roll long after that had sort of faded away. And we get into that that bit by bit where each rocker was during that period. You know, Elvis in the Army, Buddy dead, Eddie dead, Chuck in jail, and Jerry Lee Lewis described all that stuff. Their brand of rock and roll that was like the thing that put the Beatles on the path they became on had faded and had been sort of taken over by, it became a producer's medium, and pretty faces with or without talent wasn't necessary if they were marketable. You know, the same stuff that happened a couple generations later with American Idol and shows like that, where as long as you've got something that's photogenic and passable and pleasant, will control everything else. So that was sort of what was going on in that dead zone, as you call it. But it was still master craftsmen that were creating the material. And so the Beatles, while wearing their leathers and still sort of channeling the energy of that first wave of rock and roll, they recognize a good song when they heard it. So that's why at Decca you've got them doing Golf and King, Take Good Care of My Baby, and Chains, and all these other tunes. They ended up recording Baby It's You, that are from master craftsman songwriters, brill building stuff that they recognized they could twist to their ends and make convincing and appealing and with heart and all that other stuff. So, it was a dead zone commercially, but by the time the audience was ready for Beatles to come along and they were getting ready to make their first records, they were fresh because nobody was rocking like that at that point.
Yeah, I look at that era of 58 to 62, like pre-Beatles, as there's a bit of a corporate takeover that happens, and understanding the music business and the business of the music business, and it simply is to sell records, and make money. So while there was appeal to the form of rock and roll, the packaging of it was not, of early rock and roll, was not appealing to mass culture. So you water it down, you find the teen idols that are broadly acceptable, and you give them that catalog. And now you get, Pat Boone, rocking out. And
Cliff Richard.
So, yeah, or Cliff Richard, who, but again, there were a lot of great records being made still. Mm-hmm. And the Beatles, while they had that purity in their soul about what rock and roll meant to them, as Robert pointed out, they also, and I think McCartney in particular, they love a good song, just a good song, no matter where it's coming from. And this was an era of there was a lot of good songs coming out in the American songbook tradition, as well as the brill building tradition, as well as
Motown.
Motown, and Denmark Street in London. There was just a lot of good songs being written, and here and there authentic performances to still get your teeth into. But certainly the rock scene was watered down and dissipated by and through that there was an opening for something that was enthusiastically authentic.
Yeah.
Which was what the Beatles brought back when they got their chance to reach for the brass ring.
And I agree with you. There still was great music. I mean, that there's many wonderful songs from that time period. Ira Davis always refers to it as the age of the Bobbies, because there was Bobby Vinton and Bobby P and Bobby Darin and the Bobbies. But
right now,
if you listen to some of the most beautiful songs of that era, and then you contrast it with She Loves You, as Gould says, the teacup rattling She Loves You. It's a whole different ball game when the Beatles step in. And why? Because, as you so wisely point out, a lot of the principles, for various reasons, have been removed. I think what you say about that is much more important than the impact of the death of John F. Kennedy on the Beatles' success, because that didn't impact a lot of the little teeny boppers that become fans at the airport. It is more the fact that there was a gateway opened for someone to come in and be fresh and new and vibrant. And that's what you say. It's really spot on. So let's go quickly to the September 5th Granada TV, Some Other Guy, Kansas City, hey recording, which I knew nothing about. So tell us about that.
So the irony of the whole clip of the Beatles, the earliest sound footage we have is, famously Some Other Guy at the Cavern, August 22nd, 1962. And the irony is that it was Mona Best that set that whole thing in motion by lobbying Granada TV to come down and film this great band. Well, you got your wish, just not under the circumstances you thought you would. We want Pete, that they cry at the end of the performance. Anyway, So the crew comes down there, films them. It's not well lit. It's very compact. It smells. It's damp, all that stuff. Very very trying circumstances. They think they've got some good visuals, and then the B-roll stuff, showing dancers and just the crowd getting good shots of that stuff. But ultimately, they're reviewing the footage back in Manchester, and they're like, the sound is really not too good. And so they make the decision, if we're going to use this stuff, we need a better recording. So instead of the one mic we use, we're going to go back to with three and try to get them under more controlled conditions, and then we can dub in the audio of that. And it happens that this is the day after they've, down in London at Parlophone at EMI, they've recorded the Ringo version of Love Me Do. Now they got to go all the way back to Liverpool to then do this chore for Granada TV, which ends up they cut and make acetates of two performances of some other guy and then the Kansas City Hey Hey Hey, both of which thankfully exist. And in fact, Brian used his copies to shop around to interest BBC and TV stations and all that stuff. But ultimately, Granada took a hard pass on everything they'd done to that point. So what would have been their TV debut ended up not being their TV debut, but it did get seen in Britain like a year later, post She Loves You. It's like, here's Primordial Beatles.
Yeah. Gee, thanks. Gee, thanks for helping us when we need it.
Right.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I don't know if you're listening, if you've even heard this, but it's all here and it's all available for you to enjoy. All right, last one. The Beatles' practice of drawing people into their circle who are better than they are and who challenge them. That's incredible, because most people are a little bit put off by someone that's better than them. They embrace it. Tell us about that.
Well, throughout their career, the Beatles would attract people into their orbit that gave them something that they needed at the time. And hats off to them for recognizing that well, they needed a manager, bring first bring Alan in to get them bookings, and then when Alan isn't cutting it, Brian will do. There's the first step, but it was always this goal to be as good as they could be, and fairly unapologetic about it. And perhaps unfortunately for the people that got drawn into that orbit, they also discovered that if you weren't useful anymore, you weren't useful anymore. There's definitely a, I don't think cutthroat's the right word, but
Unsentimental.
That's a more polite word. Yeah. The if you were useful to the Beatles and in any way inspiring, or you would, or you're the guy that would drive the van or carry the drums, hey, sure, come along for the ride. But you're not useful anymore. Cutting you loose is not going to break their hearts, as much as it might break your heart. And the universe of the Beatles, it continues to be. It's a very compact world. There's only a few people that ever had access to it, or ever will have access to it, and that started very, very early. So.
Yeah. You point out Rory Storm as one of those people. Definitely made friends with Rory because Rory was quite good. And the other person I can think of, which it was not music related, was June Furlong, who was the life model at Liverpool College of Art. And she was painted by all of the greats of the day. They sought her out to paint her a picture. Everyone in London, everyone in Europe. And John Lennon would follow her around and say, "You're famous. How did you get to be famous?" He was like a puppy dog on her heels, trying to discover the way to get famous. Helen Anderson. Helen had painted a picture of Cliff Richard. She was quite well known for that. So he went to find her, to seek her out. how did you get to do this? How did you become famous? And you really talk about some of the people that they embraced in this book. And it's important because when folk rock emerges in 1965, they could either reject it and say that's not for us, or they could embrace it, go to the Byrds recording sessions, hang out with them, take that on and make themselves better. And you tell us they were willing to do that.
Oh, sure. They weren't snobs when it came to borrowing things that they could repurpose. We talked a few minutes ago about that supposed dead zone in music. Well, Save the Last Dance for me is one of the most beautiful tunes of that era. Where do we see it manifest itself years later? But in Hey Jude, that the minute you went out into her heart, then you would start. Yeah. So all that stuff was always steeping in their brains, right? And we point out in the book other things that I don't think have been talked about much before, where you could sort of see them hearing something like, oh, that's good. What can we use this in? So you've got the example of Ask Me Why having a direct influence from Smokey Robinson and What's So Good About Goodbye. And it's one of those little quirks of history that the first Motown song played on BBC radio was not by a Motown artist. It was the Beatles covering Please Mr. Postman.
That's fantastic. I love that. That's the kind of gem that you get. And what I'm trying to show all of you who are listening is that there's so many gems in here that you've never heard of. In fact, the Easter recording at Fortland Road is not the only one that they did at Fortland Road. If I'm not mistaken, they do another one in July. Is that right?
Yeah, June, July, right. Before Hamburg.
And you can listen to that as well. It's in here and the whole description. So there are things that you've never heard about, or if you've heard about, you may not have actually listened to, and they're all in here. So one of the things that excited me was on page 134, you state, and I quote because I'm holding you to this book strives to be an exploration of all Beatles recordings in chronological order. When I read that, I went, yes, there's going to be. So are you going to go all the way through the Beatles' career?
Volume 2 is a work in progress.
Yeah. And it's beyond, what I explored in the reference manuals, which was their core catalog of work that was released officially by EMI Parlophone in the UK. We're going to cover all of the known recordings that we can track down, and that there is something to say about. Next up is 1963, and so we're going to be talking about the BBC recordings that they did. We're going to be talking about and get into some of the nitty gritty of how those were made, how they came together, throughout this series. The idea is that we want to look at the influences that the Beatles drew upon and perfected to make their own music from, because every artist stands on the shoulders of giants, and the Beatles were no different in that respect. We want to bring that to light. We want to expose the giants that the Beatles were loving and working to emulate in their own way. It couldn't help but come out as the Beatles, but certainly, and Robert pointed out that early example of Ask Me Why, they're drawing upon stuff that they love, and in their own way, they're making it better. We want to show that. We want to show them the work that they created from those influences and the influences all around them of pop culture, what's going on, politically, what's going on, all around them. And then we follow the story out to present day. And that's the other thing that we do. And we do, starting with volume 1, is we help you understand the lasting influence of songs like Love Me Do. Some people might not know that, there are covers of that song by Smithereens, and Love Me Do is referenced in a Bad Company track. All of these things, we want to paint as full a picture as we can of the Beatles in context of their times and how they continue with us through modern times. So it isn't this and it isn't in isolation. It's not Beatles, only Beatles, because that wasn't the world they lived in. We've talked about this on with other interviews, but just that idea of in '67, I believe the Monkees outsold the Beatles in the U.S. In '68, I believe Three Dog Night outsold the Beatles in the U.S. There were years where they're not the biggest thing happening, but in the fullness of time, they're the biggest thing happening.
Exactly.
So that's what we want to tell, that whole story, and not the limited kind of fan driven story.
And lest you think that this is going to be a dry and dull book and that it's not for you because it sounds too technical, let me just read you one short paragraph. In hindsight, when you think about it, it should surprise no one that the prime mover in Beatles history, the person who got them onto the world stage, Brian Epstein, was a record store manager. Vinyl was the currency of rock and roll. That tells you how the whole book is written. It's beautiful. It's interesting. You will do what I did and underline. I think underlined everything. It is a book that you will thoroughly enjoy. So where can people get Ribbons of Rust? And the question of the day, are you going to be at the Chicago Fest for Beatles fans?
One of us is.
Yeah, this is.
You can get it at the fest for sure. You can get book plate signed editions right now online. It is on Amazon. It will be moving to other outlets at some point soon, but that's where it's certainly available worldwide in 2 editions, I might add. There is the full-blown color one, where we're very much making part of the story, being drawn into the world they lived in. However, we discovered after we produced it that it's cost prohibitive in the Pacific nations. So we introduced a monochrome edition. So it's the same exact book minus the color, but it's affordable as well. So anybody that's choking on the price point can always spring for the black and white.
And where would you be able to get that?
It's on Amazon. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, both versions are available on Amazon everywhere. On Amazon everywhere again, except for the Pacific nations, which don't support the color production, but only support the black and white production. But if you can buy the color production, you can buy the black and white one. And the book looks kind of great in black and white too, I gotta say. So yeah, and we'll 63 do that.
Will be interesting because that's the volume where they transform from being the influenced to the influencers.
Yeah.
And divining what point that occurs is going to be the challenge. But that's what we try to incorporate into it. Is a much bigger context and tapestry of rock. It's Beatles, but it's also that culture centric, their culture.
Why Would the BBC is my favorite Beatles LP. And I like them as a stage band doing the covers. That's my favorite. Baby It's You is my favorite Beatles song. So, I mean, I cannot wait. I cannot wait for volume 2. So we always close by asking, what is your favorite John Lennon quote? And it can be a lyric. It can be something he wrote in one of his books behind me. It can be anything he said. Jerry, what's your favorite?
My favorite is time wounds, all heals.
Yeah.
Which when I heard that, I mean, it's such a Lennonism in the first place to twist the phrase around. But what a wonderful thought for those that are, seeking a little, just a little peace when they're going through difficult times, which he was. And I think he said that on the occasion of him getting his green card.
Yeah.
It made me laugh, but it's a statement of hope as far as I'm concerned too, for all of those that face oppression and difficulty, that those that are putting it on you, you don't really have to worry about it. They will get theirs.
Yeah, that's
it's the karma's gonna get you.
It's the karma's gonna get you.
Think. And Robert, what's yours?
Well, I'm not going to choose the one that ends with "You don't understand life." because that's
Okay,
nonsense.
please no.
I was thinking that we all go on a journey with the Beatles. If we love the Beatles, we will always love them. Sometimes we're more steeped in them than other times. And that's especially true for the Beatles themselves. As we know, I've done a couple books on the Beatles in the 70s, that immediate post-breakup traumatic period where, up and down they would go, high or low with their feeling. But there was a great quote that as he was stepping into the seclusion years of not working and recording, after his great high of number one album and a number one single with Walls and Bridges, the so-called lost weekend, which I more accurately characterized as the found weekend, when
Yeah.
he was incredibly productive. But anyway, he's talking to Chris Charlesworth in Melody Maker. And of course, that the question always implicit, if not explicit, what about getting back together again? And it's such a beautiful way of summing it up. Just that moment. It's like, if we couldn't, I just wish we could capture that guy, the guy in that moment saying, at the time, I was thinking that I didn't want to do all that Beatles, but now I feel differently. I've lost all that negativity about the past, and I'd be happy as Larry to do Help. I've just changed completely in 2 years. I do Hey Jude and the whole damn show. It's like, yes, you were embracing, you're getting it. You're getting what you mean to the fans in that moment. You're a Beatles fan too, as he had said at different points, collecting bootlegs and stuff. It's like, yes, that's the guy. Boy, I wish we had more years of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was that guy on so many days. And I wish I could say that to people, because I could give you 50 examples of things that he did for people that aren't talked about, that were
Mhm.
kind and generous. But I think today we're getting a lot of the brash, mean John Lennon quotes, and it's so unbalanced. It's so unbalanced. But you will get a very balanced, well-researched, beautifully written, easy to use, interesting history of John, Paul, George, Pete, Stu, and of course Ringo's in the book because he's with Roy Storm and the Hurricanes. And you are going to really enjoy Ribbons of Rust. You can get it on Amazon. And how do you get the book plate copies? Because I did not see that when I ordered mine. How do you get that?
Oh, I think Lapito's cornered the market on that. But if you
Yes,
show up at the
yes.
Fest in August, you get mine live. There probably will be plates signed by Jerry in his absence. But I think we've got a website, ribbonsofrust.net, where people who are so interested can write to us anytime, and we'll certainly try to facilitate anybody that wants one.
Okay. And
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
take
yeah,
mine along.
absolutely. And that's something I've done all along with my books, is if you take time to reach out, I'll typically reach back, because I think Robert's of the same cut of the same cloth. I mean, we truly appreciate the opportunity to do this work, and for the people that it means a lot to, it means a lot to us too, that you let us into your life to share this Beatles stuff with you.
Well, we truly appreciate the work you did. Thank you both. And thank you for being here today. And thank everyone joining us through Beatles-orama Radio, and those of you watching on YouTube, Facebook, X, whatever. Thank you for being with us. Get Ribbons of Rust. You will not regret it. Thank you, guys. Robert, I will see you at the Fest for Beatles fans, August 8th through 10th.
So
All right, see you then. And to everyone, ta-ra and shine on.